Okay, it's a bit more than 2:30, so it's time to start. Welcome everyone to this sustainability talk. And for those who have not been to a sustainability talk earlier, I can tell you that Sustainability Talks is a series of seminars with the aim of connecting research and education with the global sustainability goals, the 2030 goals, and see what we can do together and how to approach these really vicious challenges that we have for our sustainable future. And these seminars, they have different forms, so usually like a guest lecture, but we have also shown films, and we had even a food seminar where we tried sustainable food and things like that. But today we are proud to present the third holder of the Zennström Guest Professorship in Climate Change Leadership, Keri, who is professor in, now I have to read here, Educational and Social Futures in the University of Bristol in England, in Great Britain. And you have been working quite a lot with connecting the society with the universities and what we do here, and how can we work together in different forms, all the disciplines, all kinds of learning is included. And today Keri is going to talk under this title, Building a University for a Common Good. How do we address the climate change together? So very welcome, Keri. Please take over, and you can continue to present yourself.
Thanks very much, Karen. Cheers. It's really, really lovely to be here today. I'll tell you a bit about me in a second, but can I just check who's in the room? So how many people are from outside the university and community? Great, okay. How many of you are inside the university? Okay, how many of you would describe yourselves as scientists or natural scientists? How many of you social scientists? How many of you arts and humanities people? How many of you are vegetarians? How many of you drive cars? How many of you have children? Excellent, so we've got lots of different people in the room. Okay, thank you. So, a little bit about me. So I'm a professor at the University of Bristol, which is there, for those of you who don't know it. And I work in an education department, but my main focus is really on how we build institutions for learning that are formal, informal, or informal, that allow us to adapt to change. Okay, so that could be in the city, it could be in schools, it could be in universities. I also head up a field of anticipation studies, which the way I describe it is how do we think about the future in non-stupid ways. That's my aim. This is a picture of my hometown, just because, you know, why not? We have a lot of hot air balloons. We're quite proud of our hot air balloons. We have a big festival each year. Anyway, that's us. So, where are we? This is where we are at the moment. Young people, 2,000 cities, climate strikes worldwide. The situation is that the science is settled. Global warming is a result of human activity. I am saying this because there are still people who contend this. So, in particular, we know that global warming comes from our dependence on fossil fuels and industrial agriculture, and our greenhouse gas emissions are dangerously warming our climate. Despite the fact that we know this, and have known it more or less for 40 years, only limited action has been taken. We are way off our 1.5 degree target set at Paris. We're also way off our 2 degree target. And the effects are already being felt. They're being felt in extreme weather events, in Arctic and Antarctic ice warming, in mass species extinctions, in the displacement of populations, and critically, the situation is this is not a future problem. I've spent a long time working in education where the answer has been presented as if we educate the next generation, they will fix it. This is not a problem for the next generation. This is an issue that we need to address now. And we need to address it now because it is going to impact our lives, actually. This is not just for the kids. This is also because this is going to start impacting our lives. So, as adults today, we've got two jobs. A first job is mitigation. And the figures that we're looking at, how many of you heard Kevin Anderson speak last time? All right, good. So some of you have already had this. It's like my obligation. I have to channel Kevin Anderson. If you don't know who he is, Google, you will find good things. So the figures that we're looking at is an 80% reduction in emissions by 2030. This means non-trivial changes to our infrastructure and our lifestyles. And the changes that we need to make are probably most significant amongst the 10% of the global population who cause 50% of the emissions, which includes us. We are in that 10%. And there is urgent need to protect diverse habitats. Okay, so there's a mitigation challenge, which involves looking at behaviours and actions now. Then there's also an adaptation challenge, which is how do we put in place plans for the potentially rapid impact of climate change? Because the reality is we don't know that if we reduce by 2030, that we'll be able to stop certain effects happening. So we have to adapt at the same time as mitigation. And what this means really is that we need to do something astonishing. We need to fundamentally enable a transition to a different way of life. This is what we need to do. This is as significant a transformation as the Enlightenment. So an Enlightenment was a huge change in our identities and our way of being in the world. And that is the challenge that we're facing right now. And critically, we need to work out how to do this without having a war or just descending into chaos. The critical question is, how do we transition to a different way of living in a peaceful way? This is a quotation from a report that just came out in Finland around how do we shift to a 1.5 degree lifestyle. The suggestion is we need a massive undertaking to develop the capacities of all stakeholders in society, not only to understand the need for radical transformation, but also to imagine alternatives to current ways of meeting needs and to accept some difficult solutions are inevitable if we're to become a sustainable civilization. So we need to invent new ways of living. So who can do that? Who can invent a new way of living? Ooh, is there somebody that we can go to and they can help fix this? No. We're all going to have to do it. We're going to have to do this collectively. It's going to need a huge range of different skills and expertise. We're going to need all of these people, from engineers to hairdressers to greengrocers to architects to doctors. So that's what I want us to start thinking about today, and that's what the invitation is today, is to think about how do we start doing that, recognising that some people are already working in this area. So what I want to do is I want to suggest that we're going to have more of a chance of addressing and living with climate change if we work together. I want to think about the models for collaboration between universities and communities and some lessons from the work that we've been doing in the UK. And I hope to sort of start and think about how we might initiate these collaborations in Gotland or build on the collaborations that are already in place. So some of today is going to be me talking. And quite a lot of it is going to be you talking to each other. So just a warning, I am not going to be standing here talking at you. You're going to have to join in. And we're going to start with some introductions. So I want to do something that I've learned now. I've been in Sweden, 4 weeks, and I've learned this is a very non-Swedish thing. So what I want you to do is see if you can find somebody you don't know and introduce yourself to them. And say a little bit about what you do and why you're here, and what else? How are you currently working, or would you like to work to address climate change issues? And then get ready, because I will ask some of you to tell me about the person that you've spoken to, okay? So I will ask some of you to tell me a little bit about the person that you've spoken to and why they're here and who they are. So we've got 6 minutes or so, so please find somebody you don't know and introduce yourself to them and get ready to tell me about them.
Ja, jag heter Ulrika. Jag är här därför att jag brinner för frågan om hur universitetet kan engagera sig i frågan om hållbarhet och klimatförändringar.
That's enough. You see, this is a problem when I start people talking, it's just going to keep going. But if you can find a place to sit now and maybe sit with some people you didn't come with. Maybe sit with some people that you don't know. There is a spare table here with lots of space on it. I promise I don't bite. Feel free to come a little bit close. People looking at me like, I'm just not doing that. I'm not going on this table. It's far too close. Okay, stay where you are. It's fine. It's very safe over there. Okay, so tell me a little bit about somebody that you've met. Lady in the fabulous pink top over there. Tell me about who you spoke to. You can't wear that top and not have me ask.
Hello, I'm first of all, choice.
Yeah.
But at least we can draw attention to sustainability issues. And I have the pleasure to be with 3 people from one from Switzerland, from Sweden, and from Canada. And yes, and we all share interests towards sustainable world. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Good choice on the top. Right. Who else? Let's have the gentleman here in the checked shirt. Rather, also fabulous checked shirt. Thank you.
Not as catchy in the eye, perhaps, but still. Yeah, we talked about what you're going to do here, actually.
You don't talk about me.
Yeah, we did. That was a lot of the conversation, actually. And the project with the museum and with Art and Humanities and how we can get that into our way of thinking. And also we just almost got into how do we continue the globalization and internationalization and still be sustainable about it. And that's where we stopped.
Excellent. That's a good lead into the next question. Right, lady here. Tell me about who you spoke to.
Well, I spoke to Keri. Unfortunately, I talked most of the time. But she told me that she has both a personal engagement with sustainability and also a professional one, of course, since she's responsible for this meeting. Well, that's about as far as we got.
That's fine, that's good, that's good. Shall I hand over to Corinne and you can tell us about the person who was speaking to you?
Yes, I spoke to Camilla, who's ethnologist. So she really works with what people do and think. And she's also involved in the master education here in what is it in English? Sustainable Destination Development. She has a personal interest in this and she can contribute by her own knowledge and from ethnology by showing patterns in how people think and behave and sort of react to this big challenge.
Fantastic.
Is that right?
More or
That's
less.
great. Okay, so you've warmed up now. There are people you don't know, and you can talk to them, and it will all be fine. Okay, that's the message. We can all go home now. Have a cup of tea, right? So I'm going to move on now to thinking about how universities and communities can work together, because fundamentally, the lesson that I have around this is that it is about relationships and relationship building. So. Before I do that, though, I am going to do the slightly stern, sort of serious statement for those of us in universities, and this is a message for us. If we want to be credible when we're talking about addressing issues of climate change, there are some things we need to do ourselves. The first one is we need to recognise that the most highly educated you are, the more likely you are to be a high emitter of greenhouse gases. Discuss. Secondly, academics amongst the highest users of international travel, of flights. How do we address internationalisation differently? Obviously, we need to recognise the Swedish government has got a crazy notion of internationalisation, which means that we're supposed to go places, as opposed to a concept of global exchange that can be intellectual. Anyway, and then I do think we need to acknowledge that in some cases, universities are allying with fossil fuel interests. There are some universities whose work, for example, with some industries, means that alternative critical views of fossil fuel industries are not able to be on the curriculum, are not able to be discussed. I'm not saying that that's what's happening here, but there are some universities where that is happening, and so there is an internal reflection that we need to take on if we're going to do this sort of work with any sort of credibility. Anyway, so that's the sort of thing I have to say as a preface. However, today what we're thinking about is trying to recognise our assets and our power and our capacity to act. Because actually we do have resources. We do have resources in this room. And there's a whole range of things that we can use to address the challenges of mitigation and adaptation. We have land, we have buildings, we have people, we've got knowledge, we've got experience, and all of these can be mobilised. But what we're not that good at recognising them and naming them and talking about them. So let's think about just land and buildings for a start. There are real opportunities for collaboration about rethinking how we use our land in our universities. And I'm going to try to just show you this little video from Oberlin College in the USA. How many of you are familiar with Oberlin? Is anybody? Yeah, great. So not many, so I will show it. This is the bit where I have to now try and... Right. Now, obviously, you need to... Oh, okay. Right, hang on. This Mac is now very badly designed because you have to actually end your PowerPoint show in order to show the video, which is quite annoying. We're going to do this a couple of times, bear with me. So just apologies for the background music here. It's a little bit West Wing, and it's a student video. But I think it's just worth having a look at some of the things that they are doing here. Just as a bit of inspiration for us.
Specific sustainability practices. So, for example, that looks like not bringing a car to campus, right? That looks like actively participating in composting and in recycling.
It gets better. The audio gets better in a minute.
Around sustainable practices.
So part of what we do on campus is not just build buildings that are sustainable, but try to get residents and people who live, work, and play in our buildings to think about sustainability.
So the Green Edge Fund is actually a student-run group on campus. It was actually formed by a group of students a few years ago. We get $20 from each student on campus every semester, and that totals up pretty fast. We've got over $250,000. It's been used for gardening projects. It's been used for carbon offsetting efforts. Students are very into the idea that they actually give money to a student group to help promote student interest in sustainability.
Through programs like the residential compost system and the free store and the big swap, we help to divert tons of materials from landfills.
We also maintain the wetland, which is a representation of how Ohio naturally filters water. And so by having this pond on site, allow for there to be a reservoir for native species, whether those be flora or fauna. And it also allows for rainwater percolation.
A sustainable wastewater treatment plant that uses all bacteria and plants to treat wastewater from the Environmental Studies building.
This is a project that came out of some research that was done by students here, and they've since gone on to create a small business startup out of this. And it started right here in this building. We wanted to monitor energy flows here in the building. It's since moved on to going into all the dorms, and we started to branch out into the city as well. We've created this item here called the Environmental Orb. They're Arduino-based embedded computers that shows water and electricity use. So it's been really interesting to use this as kind of a feedback system to enable people to know how much they're using with just simply glancing at something very quickly.
The Lewis Center is like a laboratory for learning. So when I'm teaching my course on energy and society, I would often take students outside of the classroom it adds another dimension to teaching. It makes it much more real and practical.
We're on about 10 acres of land here. It's a 2.27 megawatt array that will meet about 12% of the college's electricity needs.
This panel moves throughout the day in the same way that a sunflower would, and so it's a really good example of one of the main types of ecological design today.
So yeah.
Okay, so what we've got going on there, hopefully when it returns, is a recognition of the assets that there are in that space. One of the things that's very interesting at Oberlin is that they are also now developing an energy system that will enable near to free carbon neutral energy that gets supplied to the whole city in which the university is based. And I think one of the things that is particularly interesting there is that they've integrated the teaching and learning with these activities. So it's not, if you like, what tends to happen in a lot of universities, you have the sustainability bunch who are the kind of weird, freaky guys who sit over in the corner and shout at everybody and tell them to sort of do things better. And they're kind of engineering types, and and it sits over there separately. Apologies to my sustainability colleagues. But the critical thing that we're seeing in places like Oberlin and others is we're seeing an integration of the teaching and learning activities and the research activities with the work that's being done on campus to reflect, to change behaviours. We've also got things like there's a very big, very serious university in the UK that has a huge amount of land holdings that is now saying, how do we use that land completely differently? We've got universities that are developing joint transport systems with the local area. We've got radically different and intelligent space use, so using campus at weekends and in the evenings to enable community groups to have spaces to meet, and we've got a whole load of tree planting. So those are some of the things that we're seeing when we're thinking about using land and buildings differently. This is a project that was just running in Uppsala. Raphael Waters from Stuns is leading on this, and this is about recognising the role of students as assets. And what we have here is a really interesting project that came out of a student initiative. So the city was building new parking, what do you call them? That's a mobilitetshus. How did that go? How was that? That was my only Swedish. Okay, that's what they're building. And the city had no idea how to make that carbon neutral, so they developed a student project to work with that, to say, how might you start developing carbon neutral or environmentally friendly parking houses? That has now turned into a major 100,000 SEK project, and the building is being transformed. The students have learned a huge amount out of the process. Many of them are now doing internships there. The building itself is going to be completely different. The company that they're working with has learned a huge amount in the process. So what you start seeing, when you stop thinking about sustainability as this kind of marginal thing that sits in the corner that only the cranks deal about, and actually start saying this is something that is central to research and learning, is you start seeing a whole load of other benefits. So, however, it's not entirely clear how you do this all the time. The first thing that we have to do is think about how do we map the assets that we have in the university and in the community to think about how we might work together. So that is now going to be my challenge to you, is to organise yourselves on tables. And what I want you to do is think about what are the assets that I am aware of in terms of land or in terms of buildings, in terms of students, in terms of knowledge, and in terms of influence that might be used to address issues around climate change, because you have more assets than you realise. And the issue is we need to be able to collectively see those in order to be able to share them. So how many, I'm just thinking maybe 6 on a table might be too big. So just organise yourselves if there's too many of you to move to another table so you spread out. But the activity I'd like you to do just now is to map on these pieces of paper that you have in front of you the assets that you think you have at your disposal. Now, put everything down, because one of your colleagues might be able to say that's useful in this way, okay? Does that make sense? Is that okay? Instructions. Go for it. You've got 15 minutes, and then I will be asking you to reflect back to me on some of the assets that you realise that you have.
samordnas de uppdragen man får så att de kan ha en påverkan och inte bara en avläsning.
Okay, folks, what are the assets that we have in this room? What are the resources that you have discovered? I'm coming over this way because you're a long way away, and also I want to see if I can go. Yeah, I've gone past there without any feedback. That works well. Hurrah! Okay, so what sorts of assets have we discovered here? Hello. What, you know what, it's okay, you just read stuff off there, it's very safe. Okay, so what sorts of assets did you guys think that you could mobilise in relation to climate change issues, sustainability challenges? Who's going to speak? I'm not going to give it to any man on the table.
The student union I was thinking of, because they have like all the student programs and not only the sustainability.
Yeah. So brilliant. So we've got the student union. Anything else on this table that you wanted to say was a big asset?
Well, we have different disciplines here in this room. People from different work experiences, different contacts with different employees and professors. So all those are assets.
Fantastic. Different sorts of knowledge. Okay, brilliant. Right. I'm going to be here. Haha. Right, what did you think? So assets that you've mapped that you think might be useful, that maybe the rest of the room might not know anything about, that you'd like to share, that you've uncovered.
Or did you? One thing that came up was that on campus, as you said, there's multidisciplinary, but that we also have the connection with the region of Gotland and their direct line to the government in terms of communication. So by having that type of assets, we're actually able to maybe get change to a higher level.
We also do a lot of good things, and if we could just improve our communication and actually try to show the world what we're doing, it would be a really good thing as well. So there's a hidden asset that we need to share.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Okay, right. What have we got over here? What have we got here in terms of things? You've got good headings. Let's have a think about where the assets are that you might want to mobilise.
I think we have a lot of departments here who are very conscious about sustainability. I think we should improve the communication between one another so that so the left hand knows what the right hand does, and that will really make this more sensible, and organizing more open forum involving the general public so they know what we are doing. And they see the point in it and get involved in the process and not feeling left out.
Great stuff. Okay, so there's a theme emerging around communication that is probably worth clocking and having a bit of a think about. What are the resources where we might be able to improve our communication? Right, assets here. What assets did you guys have?
Other academic institutions around the world, because we are the main contributors to climate change and also the people benefiting the most from it. So I think we're sort of stuck in a bubble, and by talking with universities in regions that are actually seeing the effects of climate change more clearly, we can get a new understanding that might, change our view on how we should approach the issue here.
I also hear a rumour that you have something to do with games design.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm actually a game designer. I used to study geology, so I have a sort of interest in this subject. I'll say game designers are valuable because because we learn how to create engagement. We look into the psychology of people and like how do we get them hooked. Basically like machines in casinos. But we could use that knowledge to make people interested in climate change and actually see what they can do and what role they're playing in that.
Fantastic. This is it. The stuff that we take for granted, other people maybe are not connected with. So you have to share what you've got because who knows how it might be used. Okay, we had a group of students who voluntarily turned up and have joined our group. So we're going to find out what assets they have discovered or identified.
Yeah, so we study energy transition and leadership, and recently we the region of Gotland and the Swedish National Energy Agency are looking into how people in Gotland think about the pilot program and energy transition in general. So we went around all of Gotland and did surveys and communicated and got on the ground and did field work. And we also did interview with other campus students who are in these programs, some game design as well, to see their thoughts and kind of get that sort of engagement.
I think for us as well, one of the assets that we've discussed was our diverse cultural backgrounds and how we all have different understandings of what climate change is and energy usage, and how we can all come together to find common ground or cooperation in regards to our understanding of what it means to transition to renewable energy, or how to find mitigation or adaptation for climate change.
Fantastic. So thank you so much. Okay, so I'm assuming there's lots of things here. What I'd quite like to do is come up with a way, I'm just going to hope somebody will work this out before the end of this, that we can put these up on some windows. So what I'd suggest is we can put them up on the wall or put them on some tables. I'm just going to hope somebody works out how to do this in a way that means that we can go round at the end of the session and have a look at the different assets that are there. But I think the critical issue is there is an abundance of skills and knowledge and capabilities, and one of the things we're struggling with is simply how to connect those up with each other in order to affect the sorts of changes that we might want to. Okay, so that's where I get to what I'm going to talk about fundamentally here, which is really our third task. How do we build knowledge together? How do we produce what I would call, Michael Young calls powerful knowledge? And powerful knowledge for me is knowledge that affects both action on the ground, but also is theoretical, so that it means it connects up to lots of other different spaces. And one of the things that we tend to do in this area when we start talking about how we connect with communities is we act as though nobody's done it before. And there is a huge and deep tradition and set of resources that we can draw upon. So I just want to talk through those a little bit. So from the 19th century onwards, we had this movement called History from Below, which was basically when a whole load of people who'd been ignored in historical accounts of the world, usually anybody who wasn't a very rich white man, pointed out that there was a different sort of history and we ought to make it collectively. So since the late 19th century, there has been a mass movement of historical research trying to tell different stories. From the mid-19th century, from the emergence of anti-colonial movements, we have participatory action research, which is basically the setting of research agendas by communities in relation to the topics and issues they are concerned with. There are really good resources in there for the sorts of work that we might need to do if we want to think about how we transition to different ways of living. So, for example, if we were thinking about the island of Gotland, what questions might the communities on the island ask about how to transition to a different way of living? Not the ones that we in a university might frame. What are the problems and issues and challenges that people in communities are facing? We have a whole world of feminist and civil rights research from the 60s and 70s that shaped so many of our ways of thinking. Our recognition that diversity of experience and ideas is essential to creating good new innovations. The patients' rights and critical disability studies from the 1980s emerged as a result of frankly shocking medical practices where people were experimented on with no ethical frameworks. And the phrase there, "no decision about me without me," emerged from that tradition. So you've got a huge amount of really important ethical work going on in there, ethical guidelines to help us to think about collaboration. From the 1970s, we get the emergence of traditions of co-produced research. So this is the phrase, I don't know has it got big over here yet, because it is basically dominating social sciences in the UK, the idea of co-production. But it arises from Elinor Ostrom's work in the 1970s, which basically argues that you can't, for example, produce health by doing it to people. And you can't produce security by doing it to people. So, for example, the production of a healthy population requires people and professionals to work together. Similarly, creating security in a city is not just something the police do to people. It is about the contributions and the roles of communities. So that tradition gives us a whole set of insights into where collaborative research might emerge. And then much more recently, we've got the growth of open source and social innovation and user-centered design in computing. So now we have amazing mass movements of collaborative research going on, where thousands, if not millions of people can get involved in big projects together. And that's incredibly useful for scientists. So in the UK, for example, I'm going to give you two bird-related stories. So we have the Great Bird Watch, which is led by the BBC, and every year people sit in their gardens and they count the sorts of birds that they see and how many they are and what sort they are. And because that's happening across the country, you get data that you could not get any other way. My other project that I really love is one. I've forgotten the name of it anyway, I don't know where it's gone, but it's this brilliant study of the cultural stories of birds that is a project that happens across the world. So if you think about the birds that we have here, many of them will be migratory, so they will also have a place somewhere else. And what this project does, it will come back to me, the name of it, is it gathers the cultural stories of birds in all the different places around the world, and that's resulted now in the cultural significance of birds being included in the UNESCO definition of biodiversity, so that you're not just thinking about biodiversity as an ecological issue, but also as a cultural issue. So really what I'm saying is, when we're thinking about university community collaboration, there is a wealth of expertise and traditions and resources that we can draw on to help us do this well. Now, what I've been doing over the last few years, about the last 6 years, is heading up a programme called Connected Communities, which was, it's actually a 10-year project, and it's a huge experiment to say, how do we combine university knowledge and public knowledge to better produce knowledge. That's the end of that sentence. Let's forget that sentence didn't happen. Okay. We're working in a whole range of different areas. It's a £40 million, which is a 400... okay, what is that in krona? 400 million krona project. We've got 300 projects all across the country, and they're running from 6 months to 5 years. They've got a huge range of different topic areas, everything from creative economy to civil society to arts practice. And what we do is we work together from the outset with community partners. So when you're designing a research project, when you're designing your inquiry, it is about sitting down with a partner from outside the university to say, what is the topic that is of interest and of importance to you? Now, this is a huge change, because we do have a very bad habit in universities of inventing our research ideas and then going to find a partner and telling them that they need to help us with it, ideally on a voluntary basis with no resource being put into the process. So that is a thing that we need to change. So this project is really about doing collaborative research from the outset. What we've also built in is into the funding council, so the people that are awarding the money, we also have community partners making decisions about which projects should get funded and why. Now, this is hugely contentious, and I think I'd be happy to have a conversation about the risks and the benefits of that approach, but this is what we've been doing. The project looks like this. These are all of the projects. It's not a very informative slide, is it? But anyway, it's one of those slides. There was a conference I was at recently which gave an award for the most complicated slide, and I think I did quite well on that one. But anyway, so projects include, and I want to give you a flavour of these because there's a sense of the sorts of topics people come up with. I draw your attention to the second one, around the toilet. Fantastic project. What it did was it brought together architects, truckers, so people who drive lorries a long distance, often women truckers, transgender rights groups and artists, to say, how do we rethink the toilet? How do we rethink this thing that all of us use every day, and what we don't realise are the forms of exclusion and problem that these things cause? So particularly women lorry drivers, who knew? have huge issues in terms of accessing this. So there's some really interesting stuff around that. The Accord project is a project that took this big stone in Scotland. There's this massive, very famous stone called the Stone of something. I don't know what it's called, but it's a big stone. And the historical record recognises it in terms of big battles. So, you know, kings have been slain and there's all sorts of bad things going on. And what this project said was, well, how is this important also to the people who live in the local area? And it turns out that there's a whole group of climbers who love this stone. This stone is hugely important to them. And there's a history dating back several hundred years of how people have climbed this stone. And so now the ancient historical record has a record of this stone, not only for its massive historical significance, but for its role for these people. I am also going to just shift on to, this is a little film. A while ago we developed something called the Utopias Fair, which was trying to bring together all the collaborative projects that were imagining a new idea of the future. How many of you are familiar with the word utopia? Excellent, good. So you know what it means. The thing that was slightly poignant, slightly sad about this event is it actually happened the day after the Brexit vote. So we all stood there going, oh God. Anyway, I'm going to show you this film because it gives you a flavour of the range of the sorts of projects that can be developed in this process. Obviously, hang on, I'm going to have to do the thing again, aren't I? Stay with us. That's that one. And I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do subtitles on, and then I'm going to play it.
We're here in the Somerset House courtyard at the Utopia Fair. The Utopia Fair is a collaboration between Somerset House and the AHRC's Connected Communities programme. The academics have been working with artists and a whole range of community groups to come together and reimagine how we might live better together.
The Stories of Change project is trying to loosen up the public and political conversation about energy. The reason we need to do that is that we know we're going to have to act on climate change in coming years, but we know that people have become stalled in the way they think about the topic. Behind me we've got the letterpress and rubber stamping workshop where people are making their own pamphlets to feel that they've got their own voice in how we might have a future with energy that doesn't cost the earth. The other element that we brought to the Utopias Fair is a workshop where they get plasticine, Lego and some sketching pencils and they literally make up the future. We're going to take both the questions and the answers to senior decision makers in government departments not far from here.
We're looking at a house about loneliness in older people. We got a place where we found people who were willing to talk about their loneliness. The essence of what they said is translated into performance. To get people thinking about loneliness, to get them aware and recognise that loneliness is an issue and something needs to be done.
The Connected Communities programme has been going since 2010, and in that time it's done some really interesting things. So it's built a whole cohort of researchers and community partners who know how to work together to really build new sorts of knowledge. It's about saying, how do we imagine the futures that we want to see in the world, and what do we have to do in order to make them happen? Also, it's asking questions like what's not right in the way that our communities currently work, what needs to change, how might we do things differently?
Our stall is called Spaces of Dissent. We're asking a question to everyone participating in the Utopia Festival. What should our next referendum be about? Considering that the referendum that has just happened has created such division within our country, society, communities.
I'm Philip, and I'm a volunteer with the Restart project,
And we're a social enterprise and a charity which helps people to get greater life out of their gadgets. I heard a statistic recently, the e-waste produced in this country in 1 year would fill 6 Wembley stadiums. That's absolutely incredible.
This game is my personal favourite. Basically, it enables us to open up that conversation about resilience in game form. So then as workers and helpers and the wider community, we can help the young people to engage and become more resilient themselves.
I'm on the protein pressure stool. Protein is found in so many plants as well as meat, and typically we think protein, we think meat, but you find protein in jacket potatoes, nuts, seaweed, broccoli, pulses, legumes. So in terms of feeding the world more sustainably, we should all broaden our protein horizons.
One of the things that's been hugely important for us is to make the case for the arts and the creative industries as the part of society that helps us paint pictures of how the world might be, that gives us the space where we are given permission to let our imaginations run free.
Our project.
Okay, so you get the picture. You get the picture of the range of projects that are enabled. Now, the thing I want to flag is that those projects they're not just engagement projects, they're projects that actually prompt the academics to ask new questions, to inquire in different ways into the world. I want to just give you another example here, if I can link to it, because now I need to go to play from current slide, then I need to open it, and then I need to shut it again. It's fantastically seamless. Hum amongst yourselves, little tune. 1 second. Right.
Because it's quite a big tourist town, you get a lot of...
Hang on, sorry, I'm going to pull the...
people who are put off from coming as soon as they hear that there are floods. There had been proposals for building walls which had eventually got thrown out on the cost-benefit analysis that the Environment Agency carry out, where they said there's nothing we can do for you unless somebody comes up with some good ideas. And in the civic society we were looking at it and saying, what could we do? And somebody had come up with this idea of an upstream bund, where you just held the water temporarily upstream behind a small dam. The problem there is that how do you get people to listen to you when you're just Mr. Nobody from Pickering? But then along came the universities and said, would you like to work with us on a study? You end up with a report, and then you've got that credibility that the backing. If you mention Oxford University, people tend to prick up their ears.
We put together a project which had a number of fairly standard dimensions about trying to improve the way in which we model flood risk and manage flood risk. But the experimental dimension was to work with communities actually affected by flooding in the UK and to get their local knowledge and perspectives integrated into the modelling process. Having invented this method of doing it, we had to try it out, and Pickering was our first attempt. With hindsight, it's a very successful project, but at the time, we didn't know it was going to be successful. We were trying it out in that sense of experiment too. When we first actually went to Pickering, we were really feeling quite nervous about it because we turned up the week after these unseasonal summer floods. We might have looked like vultures, in which case we thought, crikey, we might not get a very good response. Or it would raise the issue again in people's minds, and there would be an enthusiasm for people to volunteer. It turned out to be the latter, so we were very fortunate in that regard. It's an excellent way of working where the flood management authorities no longer has the confidence of the local population.
Once we got past the stage of, we'd finished the project and trying to get it further, I'm just sort of poking and prodding at various agencies, MPs, local councillors and so on. But at the end of it, we've got a flood scheme. As it happened, DEFRA had a pot of money and they were looking for a number of projects in a similar way to this as pilot projects, and we ended up winning the bid for one of 3 of those. We're now in 2014 and it's just coming to fruition. Under normal conditions, you've got a culvert going through this big concrete structure which will be underground. The water all runs through the culvert, carries on through Pickering, no problem. Then you get the heavy rainfall events. When it gets to the point where the amount of water in the beck can no longer get through that culvert, the water will start to back up, fills the floodplain. What it provides is 90% of the amount of water storage needed in case of a 1 in 25 flood. You come back here in a year's time and you'll be astounded at the difference as it greens over, the trees start to regenerate and they'll be replanted. They were always speaking at our level. They weren't trying to do this highbrow rubbish and we're clever and they're not.
So we produced a large number of papers, but they pale into insignificance in comparison with actually making a difference to flood risk management.
So there's some really impressive work, and what was noticeable about that project is that the area did flood fairly shortly afterwards, and the towns were fine. And they were some of the very few places that were fine across the whole country. So the critical issue, this is what I'm trying to say, is the engagement with community is not like a nice thing. This is the way to generate new ideas that haven't been tried before, that might open up new ways of living, which is what we're talking about. So one of the things that I'd like us to do just now is just take a bit of time and think about how we might address sustainability issues together. So I think around the table, if you can just take some moment and think about what sorts of topics, what sorts of areas around climate change and sustainability might you address in Gotland. Those of you who are not in the university, please speak up. Okay, it would be really good to hear your voices and to give you permission to sort of set a bit of an agenda here. Those of you who are just in the university, maybe ask the question, how might you find out what the issues are that communities are interested in? Okay, so we'll just have 10 minutes just to catch up with each other around these questions.
Survey.
So this is the starting for that discussion. It's really related to that. I would like to share what's happening in the program right now. Our students just finished a project work where I collected elements from actors and they want to make this course. So we use this methodology, which is going out and asking people what they want. Yes. That. It's not I confirm the group, right? We're working together with for on Monday they had the presentation and she was there. It was a great presentation that they used. They made it one of the Journey Fast program and they invited them to present at our meeting with all the local companies and other stakeholders and public authorities. Four groups I usually go to these meetings and take part with research. I can push an area positive and more aggressive atmosphere in these meetings because there are discussions about resources in our very states. It's called networks of all projects involved in change, and this can cause such and positive atmosphere, so well motivated, and we talk about the sensitive issues. Zennström talked about the confinement. The first time in a very realistic way, and all the partners there, they were fighting restrictions on certain jobs. They were accepting all students have jobs now, really. And this girl worked to the whole project. She was there every time people are having some kind of ideas that they do actually act with maps on how they can guide the force and make decisions. So now she was doing her thesis work which started today together with the library and Monica and there's no movement. This should be the new day. They are now going to have a meeting together because now before local access on helping the heritage like anything that we do with education this is so that's know about this. It's such a story because it just happened. I mean, I couldn't plan that process. It just happened.
Everybody was so separated. Yeah, like I was like, yeah, I don't care. I don't care. What is it? No, I don't care.
You have the project there and you work with
I think we are quite special here that we, as a whole, have better collaboration with this rather small society than, for example, in university That's at least my perception. We have a little bit and when we have successful things like that, then it's just fantastic. And everyone research in Uppsala who is explicitly aimed to collaboration. Just like you say, like those it's bad. They think for solutions and I think they're not even going here. That's in between here, so there are so many different there are good things going on at the same time.
There's a lot of influence. Maybe nothing to do with actual things. They have doing their creative is from
It's like different they were out and they
so how do you actually
it's like always doing everything that people have to collaborate with them. Just the fact that the big universities exactly because there's a big for sure because
you don't get that everywhere. But it's good that it's being recognized and
then here you know the example from campus.
I agree. The thing is, the concern is it's not necessarily that you have to understand every aspect of the issue or something to change.
There's also an opportunity to clarify as well. Yeah, and then there's giving by example for the purposes of influence, and then there's leading by example for the purposes of collaboration goals. I think that's really important.
Okay, folks, let's just pull ourselves back together into the group. So, what were some of the things that you were talking about on your tables? Where did this take you? I'm going to go over to this table here and ask somebody to say something about what you were talking about.
We were talking a little bit, it's an interesting conversation because I've lived here for about 6 months and then they both have lived here for quite a while. So they were kind of asking what I saw and I honestly, it was more like talking about public transportation and like individual things, I guess, like the amount of like plastic on produce and like those kind of things. And then we were also talking about like water scarcity and so different issues like that and maybe how the university can kind of help and be a resource in trying to solve some of those issues. So, is there anything? Yeah, or like a facilitator.
Fantastic. Okay. So we've got some issues already lining up. Water, always an issue on an island. Plastics. This is public transport. Okay. So those are some of the things. What else is coming up? You might have had a slightly different conversation from the one I suggested you talk about. That does happen. It is allowed. What about this table here? What sorts of things are you talking about?
The two big elephants in the room that we don't see, the limestone industry and travelling across the Baltic Sea.
Interesting. Okay. So this is one of the things that is going to face us is not everybody's going to agree. Not everybody is going to want to do the same thing. So this is where processes like citizens' assemblies can become really useful, which is where you pull a whole cross-section of people from one place together and you interrogate the issues together and you try to work out some of those tensions.
We actually mentioned one even larger elephant, and that is financial systems and economy. So growth.
Yeah. Okay, so growth, economic models, how are we going to handle all of that? That's also a good one. One of the things I would say in this area is hold it, go into it, go deep, because there's lots of people looking at alternatives. It's not like, oh, it's this really big, enormous, scary thing, we mustn't go there and think about it. Sometimes you actually just need to look at it and see who else is doing work in that area. Anyway, right, excellent. Up at the back there, I'm coming to you. I'm coming, it's a long way. For anybody, yep. Come on.
Yeah, maybe we drifted apart as well a bit, but we talked mostly about meeting points of community, and these meeting points are really super rare. And there I brought up the idea of the example of going to the sauna, because there you really meet people. They drop not only literally but also in a metaphorical way their facade somehow, and you really talk to each other on an equal level, and you can share your best experiences in different settings and so on. And yeah, you really lose the fear to approach people in a way, because there you are on exactly the same level, and that's super nice, I would say.
That's great. It made me think I was coming through Copenhagen on the way here, and we had an hour between trains, and I found there was a conversation sauna that I noticed on the side of one of the canals in there, and it was explicitly set up so you could go into the sauna, but it said you have got permission to talk to each other about issues in here. And I think that's an interesting thing. We had a workshop yesterday where a couple of the issues that came up were how do you support people to meet each other and talk to each other? And I was mentioning there's a place called a Conversation Cafe in the UK where you are allowed, the point is you buy a cup of tea or a coffee, and in doing so you say, people are now allowed to come and talk to me. So it's about giving permission to connect. And I think these are some of the things that we're talking about here, is how do we create spaces for connection? How do we recognise we're not going to be able to solve things on our own? We are human social beings and we need relationships with each other. Okay, so lovely suggestions. Thank you very much. So what I've been doing over the last few years is reflecting on what it takes to build good collaborations. So you know those 300 odd projects, well, we've interviewed most of them and we've tried to learn what it was that enabled them to work well, and they don't all. Let's just be very clear, sometimes collaborations are difficult. And the critical thing that comes up, if you're going to build good university community collaborations, you know how the physicists, they need this massive £20 billion thing under the ground to send particles around, okay? That's what they need, apparently, as their core role. What we need for this work, our big thing, is this. Okay? That's what we need. And we need to recognise that things are going to be slow. And we need to give ourselves permission for things not to have results straight away. And so one of the things that's come out from our work is that actually the same amount of money but spent over a much longer period of time can be incredibly useful, because what you're trying to do is that slow process of building trust and respect. And that only comes through knowledge and taking time to listen and to hear the different opinions. So listening is possibly the most important thing that you're going to do if you're going to make these collaborations work. The other really important thing is recognising and valuing different sorts of knowledge and expertise and trying to find ways of doing that. And that's incredibly difficult for those of us who are academics, because we have been brought up to think that being clever with words and numbers and written down on papers and being fluent is what intelligence is, and we're very up here, and we know, being intelligent means being up in this bit, and we forget that there's so many different ways of being intelligent. And that means things like recognising that your collaborators might not do everything in writing. Okay, they might not have an email-addicted culture like we do. They might phone you, they might want a conversation, they might want to hang out with you and be present with you. And you may have to make yourself uncomfortable. You may have to participate in activities that involve using your body and that involve dancing, for example. I have done many times. There's somebody who's got their hand up there who wants to say something. Please say something. Yeah, of course. I'm going to give you a thing.
Because I think what we gain from that exercise is to start to think about social status, which I think is also one really big issue that we need to address.
Absolutely, because what happens quite often is once you get these partnerships going, there's this really weird idea that academics know everything and they're really powerful and really important, and it's a bit of a disaster that for actually having good conversations. So what you want to do is to break that sort of stuff down absolutely as much as you can.
Yes, and within this I would like to add that recognize we have different languages, and that could be codes as well as country languages, sort of. We have to recognize that and fill that gap as well. So you speaking one language, I another, and we have to sort of collaborate in any way.
Absolutely. Yeah. So critical is knowing that actually it's astonishing that we as humans are able to communicate with each other. I mean, it's a completely mad thing, isn't it? if you think about it. It's quite astonishing. So it's recognizing that you're going to misunderstand each other, but starting from a basis of trust. In order to do that, there are some questions and real tensions that always come up in these projects, okay? Guaranteed. So, actually, just before I do that, I just want to say one thing. The first project usually doesn't work, okay? The first project is usually a bit rubbish, and pretty much nobody gets out of it quite what they wanted. The academics don't get a forced amazing star journal paper, and the community partners don't get like the transformed action that they wanted now. And it's just a bit rubbish. It's fine. That's the job of the first project. So just stay with it and recognise that the next one will be a bit better, okay? That's a critical thing. Anyway, but some real tensions that come up in university community collaborations. Why are we doing this work together, all right? So academics will usually want to do action so that they can produce knowledge. Community partners want knowledge so that they can produce action. If you do not have a conversation about this very early on, you are going to get into trouble, okay? First problem. Second one is this question of duration. How long are we going to work together? So quite often, again, universities have got themselves into a mindset that they only do stuff when there's some funding associated with it, which means they're thinking in short project-based approaches. The partners that you're working with may be working in a place or with people to whom they've made a lifetime commitment, and they're going to be there for the long haul. So there is a huge tension about how long are we going to be doing this together? How are we going to move in and out? And what is the nature of your commitment? Third tension is around accountability. Who are we accountable to when we're doing this sort of work? And you just simply need to put the names of the people that you're accountable onto the table and negotiate how you're going to deal with their different requirements, because you're just going to need to do that. There's a slightly tricky one, which is around what is knowledge for. So you can pretty much guarantee that a lot of organisations that approach universities are looking for the stamp of approval for the university so that they can get more funding in future. All right, that's one argument about what knowledge is for. Alternatively, they might want truth. Okay, so tell us the truth of what the situation is. Now, if you've got one worldview, so some academics will work with that worldview, then that's okay. But others will say, actually, the knowledge I'm going to produce is going to be a bit provisional. It might be emergent. It's going to be a perspective on something. And there can be one hell of an argument about why it is that we're doing this. And finally, there's a very practical question. When are we working? Are we doing this in office hours? Or are we doing this the whole time that any issues might be needed? Because there are huge demands in terms of emotional labour about when work happens. So there's real questions really around that. These are common tensions, they're normal tensions, and they're tensions that just emerge because organisations are different. So they just need working through. But more fundamental as an issue, I think, is this question of the sorts of exclusions that might be made once universities start building their relationships more widely with community partners. And one of the things that we are seeing as this process gets stronger in the UK, and in fact across Europe, is that those without social capital or financial capital or other resources are finding it difficult to build these partnerships. So quite often in funding proposals there'll be a requirement for a partner to contribute money to match in kind to join a project. Who is that excluding? Also, when we did this programme, when we spoke to the community partners that were involved, over half of them had had some sort of relationship with the university before. Okay? And that's not surprising because social networks, ideas and projects come out of social networks. But there is a risk to that because not everybody is in a social network that is close to and connected with the university. So what we need to do is to make some serious and intentional efforts to challenge our ideas about who we work with and to think very carefully about how we might build those partnerships. So one of the things that we've done over the last 2 years is a project called Common Cause Research, because one of the areas in particular is that we discovered that in the UK, The universities were very bad at building partnerships with individuals and communities from black and minority ethnic groups. There was just very little in the way of social networks. So what we've done is a very substantial project that really talks through what might be required. And out of that, we've come up with a set of principles for collaboration. Now, these principles work for all forms of partnership, but who knows fair trade? Who knows the fair trade process, okay? So fair trade is based on a set of principles. So what we've done is we've taken the fair trade idea and developed it for universities. And we want these to be applied by universities when they're building partnerships with community, because, frankly, it's necessary. A key, I will just run through these, and I'm happy to take some questions on this shortly. But critically, what we need to know is that when we're starting partnerships, our role is to strengthen the organisation we're working with, not to make it weaker. And that actually can happen, that they are left weaker. That we're committed to mutual benefit, that we're going to be transparent and accountable in the way that we're working, that we will pay our partners appropriately. This does not always happen. It's astonishing how many times I've heard of community activists who've been working in a community for a very long time, who have spent 20, 30 years building relationships and networks, who are able to convene a public together, and an academic partner will go to them and say, oh, can you just pull a group of people together for me for free? You know, there's no recognition of the huge amount of effort and time that has gone into that, or of their expertise. This fifth one is actually a critical one. This is fair payments for participants, and that means pay people on time. Universities are large organisations, and there is a huge risk that when small organisations work in collaboration with them, they don't get paid for months and months and months, and that can lead to that organisation going bust, becoming bankrupt, or a whole range of other issues. So universities really need to think about their responsibility here. So make sure you talk to your finance team if you're going to build a partnership, and help them understand the critical importance here. There's a whole range of other things here, but I'll come to that later. I want to give you a chance as a group here to think about attending to unintentional exclusions. Let's be clear, nobody intentionally is setting out to exclude groups, but it does happen as a result of the fact that we are existing in historical cultures that have particular patterns. That's what happens. So what I'd like you to do now is just take 5 minutes and think together, who is not in this room today? Who should be in this room? Why is it that they are not? And what could we do differently? How should we organise something like this if we want to make sure that we are not increasing the exclusions of people who are able to work with communities, with universities? Yeah, we're getting there. That's fine. Crack on. 5 minutes.
But even just the way you use it, even if you're using it as those without higher education. The environment is not at all representative. A lot of the things that we're talking about as solutions have made my hair curl. Because they are environmentally destructive. They don't have enough support for the environment for it. What language do you speak? Yeah, there are a lot of people that are. Yeah, that's it. The whole thing about people expecting experts to know everything has never been Maybe.
I'll go back to the college time again, because then we tried to reach out to the society and to invite people to open everything, you know, and like so then we plan to have this go out to all the small
community meetings and
to all these,
I don't know the word, but I can picture what you're talking about.
The building in each parish that people, where they meet,
Go to have
their
dinners
parties,
and
and to make them welcome to come
Some of these relationships have been negative for literally hundreds of years now, so it takes time Yeah, certain degrees of authority, and I use authority as a term in quotes, but it makes people instantly mistrust, which I also get. You're fighting for every dollar, and every time you turn around, there's another hand in your pocket. I get it.
I think what you're saying about ties to the relationship takes time. That's mine. So far, we're time to understanding the active don't put time they want joy.
We talk about we and them.
No, I know, this is why.
Vocabulary is kind of, we also tend to think that way.
What is how you born and raised? Is that? Yeah. I really like this slide. I really like this one. Kind of this slide. The idea of setting some boundaries in relationships up front.
But I also have the same experience.
Like you say, it's always there's people you want to communicate with.
Okay, folks, let's reconvene. I'm sorry, that's not long enough. This is, all of these are conversations that require a little bit longer, and they require a bit more mulling over and a bit more thinking. So I hope there'll be some opportunities for thinking and reflecting on all of this, and that you'll take that, particularly that last question, home. And I think that next time you're organising anything or seeking to build partnerships with anybody, just this question of who's going to find it easy to participate, who's going to find it difficult, and what can I do about that? Because there are some things that you can do. So I'm going to wrap up, okay? And there's just two things I want to say. One of them is we are going to have to work out how to live differently. Mike Hume, who's written a brilliant book called Why We Disagree About Climate Change, he says, ask not what you can do for climate change, but what climate change can do for you. And I think, let's use it. Let's use this challenge as an opportunity to rethink our society, to rethink our world, to explore how we might live better. So let's work through it to a different way of living. And for those of you who are in universities, quite often we can get stuck in the idea that there's no way that they can change. And I think we have to recognise that universities have changed significantly over history and that they are different in different places. So some of their histories involve universities being about the church and about educating the priesthood. That was taken for granted that that's what they were for. In other places, they were about educating civil servants and making the state work well. We seem to have got ourselves into a situation today where we think that universities should be solely in service of the economy and the development of good workers. Discuss, that's another longer conversation. However, I would like to suggest it is possible, given that there are these different models of what a university might be for, that we could start asking ourselves the question, is it possible that the university could develop a new role and a new identity and a new purpose? And maybe what it is in service of is life, and in service of the development of people and knowledge and communities who are not only able to sustain life, but to nurture it. And I think if that's the sort of thing we might want to do, then we need to recognise that we can't do it alone. And so I hope today has been useful for starting to think some of those partnerships through. Thank you very much. These are some websites that you probably can't read very well, but if you look for me, you'll find these, that will give you access to quite a lot of the reports and methods that we've developed about university community collaboration. So please feel free to have a look at those and also come and have a chat with me later if there's anything you want to pick up on. Thanks ever so much for your participation today. It's been great. Cheers.